The morning I found out, I was standing in the kitchen in my socks, waiting for the coffee to finish, thinking about nothing in particular. Maybe the weather. Maybe whether I needed to get the gutters cleaned before fall hit. Normal stuff. The kind of thoughts you have when you believe your life is in order. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a voicemail from someone at Fidelity. Not a robocall, an actual person, asking me to call back at my earliest convenience regarding some activity on my account. That phrase. Some activity. I remember standing there listening to it twice, the coffee maker still dripping behind me, and feeling something cold move through my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. I was 53 years old. I'd spent 26 years as a civil engineer for the county, the kind of work where you check your numbers twice and then check them again. Because a bridge that fails doesn't give you a second chance. I had done the same with my money. Every year, every contribution, every rebalancing. I had a binder. My wife used to tease me about the binder. My wife. I should tell you about her. Her name was Lorraine, and she passed 3 years ago this past March. Pancreatic cancer. It was fast, which people tell you is a mercy, and maybe they're right, but fast doesn't mean easy. It means you don't have enough time to say everything you needed to say. We were married for 29 years. She was the one who kept the house feeling like a home, who remembered everyone's birthdays, who knew which of our 2 kids needed a push and which one needed space. After she was gone, I handled things the way I always had, quietly, methodically, one task at a time. The grief I pushed to the side. I told myself I'd deal with it later. I'm still getting around to it. Our daughter, Melissa, lives about 40 minutes away in the same suburb where she grew up. She works in marketing, married a guy named Troy who sells commercial real estate, and they have a boy named Jack who just turned 8. Good kid. Quieter than you'd expect from those 2 parents, but good. Our son, Kevin, is a different story. Kevin is the one who moved to Portland right out of college and called it following his dream, who spent 3 years doing something vague, with a startup that never quite launched, who eventually landed a job doing project coordination for a nonprofit that works with unhoused youth. He doesn't make much money. He doesn't own a house. He drives a 12-year-old Subaru with one bumper sticker that says "Be kind," and another one for a brewery that closed down in 2019. When Lorraine was sick, Kevin drove down every weekend for 4 months straight without being asked. When she died, he stayed for 2 weeks and did all the things I couldn't bring myself to do. The phone calls, the paperwork, the going through her closet. He never asked for anything and I never thanked him properly. That's one of the things I'm still working on. Melissa visited when she could. Troy had a thing with work. Jack had soccer, I understood. About 8 months after Lorraine passed, Melissa started bringing up the investment account. It was the largest single piece of my retirement, close to $340,000, built up over decades of maxing out contributions and leaving it mostly alone. Melissa said she was worried about me managing everything on my own, which wasn't an unreasonable thing to worry about. I had never been the one to log into the accounts. That had always been Lorraine's department. I knew the numbers, I just didn't know the passwords. Melissa offered to help. She came over one Saturday with her laptop, and we spent about 3 hours getting me set up. New email, new login, new password I immediately wrote down and tucked into the binder. Before she left, she suggested adding her as a joint account holder, just as a backup, in case something happened to me. She said it would make things easier for everyone, and she said it in that practical, slightly impatient way she has, and I thought, she's not wrong. Something could happen. I'm 50 now. I live alone. I said yes. I didn't think about it again for 2 years. I called Fidelity back from the kitchen, standing there in my socks with my coffee finally poured. The man who answered was calm and professional, the way people are trained to be when the news is bad. He asked me to verify my identity, which I did. Then he told me there had been a series of withdrawals from the account over the past 11 months. Transfers specifically, 11 of them, to an external bank account. He asked if I had authorized these transfers. The number he gave me was $212,000. I sat down on the floor. I don't remember deciding to sit down. I was just suddenly on the floor with my back against the cabinet and the coffee mug on the tile next to me, somehow not spilled. I want to be clear about something. When he said that number, my first thought was not my daughter. My first thought was that someone had hacked the account. A scam. Something from outside. Because that is the story you tell yourself when the alternative is worse than you're ready to accept. I asked the Fidelity man what account the transfers had gone to. He couldn't give me the full number, but he could tell me it was a personal checking account, not a brokerage, not another investment account, a checking account, and it had been added as a linked account approximately 22 months earlier, 2 months after Melissa became a joint holder. I sat on that kitchen floor for a long time. The next few days I moved slowly. I pulled up the account on my laptop and looked at the transaction history. The transfers ranged from $8,000 to $25,000, never a round number, spread out over almost a year, none of them close enough together to trigger an obvious alert. Whoever had done this was careful. Whoever had done this knew what they were doing. I called my brother-in-law, Lorraine's younger brother, a man named Pete, who had been a district attorney for 18 years before he retired. Pete and I had always gotten along. He was the kind of man who listened before he spoke, which is rarer than it should be. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Don, don't call Melissa yet. Don't warn her, and don't move a single dollar." He told me to get an attorney who specialized in elder financial abuse. He told me to file a report with the State Securities Division. He told me to get a forensic accountant to document everything. And he told me that whatever I was feeling right now, I needed to set it aside for the time being, because if I went in emotional, I would make mistakes that would hurt me later. "I'm 62 years old," I told him. This was my retirement. "I know," he said. "That's why you have to be careful." I did what Pete told me to do. I found an attorney named Susan Brightwell who had spent 15 years doing exactly this kind of work. She had the energy of someone who had heard every variation of this story and was still angry about all of them. I liked her immediately. She walked me through what we were looking at. The linked external account turned out to be a checking account in Melissa's name. Individual, not joint. The account had been linked to my Fidelity account using credentials that matched my login, meaning either Melissa had used my login information, or she had set it up herself during the time she had access to my account setup. The transfers had started slowly and then increased in frequency. The pattern, Susan told me, was consistent with someone testing limits before becoming more confident. $212,000. She had taken it over 11 months, and I hadn't noticed because I didn't log in, because I trusted her, because she was my daughter. Kevin called on a Thursday night, the way he always did, just to check in. I hadn't told him anything yet. I wasn't sure how. He asked how I was doing, and I said fine, the word coming out flat and wrong, and he paused and said, "Dad, what's going on?" And I told him. He didn't say much for a long time. Then he said, "Okay, what do you need?" Not "I can't believe it." Not "Are you sure?" Not "Maybe there's an explanation." Just, "What do you need?" I told him I had an attorney and a plan and that I didn't need him to do anything except not contact his sister until things were further along. He said he wouldn't. He asked if he could come down that weekend. I said yes. He drove down Friday night and slept on the couch, and in the morning we had coffee and sat at the kitchen table, and he listened while I went through the whole thing again. He asked good questions. He didn't try to fix my feelings. He left Sunday afternoon, hugged me at the door, and drove back to Portland. That's Kevin. Now let me tell you about what happened 3 weeks before I made that call to Pete, because there's a piece of this I haven't told you yet, and it matters. My grandson Jack's 8th birthday party was in late July, a Saturday, at Melissa and Troy's house. Backyard thing, bunch of kids, a rented bounce house, the kind of chaos that makes you feel simultaneously grateful for grandchildren and grateful you don't live with them. I stood at the edge of the yard with a paper plate and watched Jack run himself ragged and thought, "This is good, this right here is good." At some point during the party, Kevin pulled up. He hadn't RSVP'd, or at least Melissa said he hadn't, and there was a moment when I saw the two of them exchange a look across the yard. Not a warm look, the kind of look that has history behind it. Later, when the kids had settled and the adults were standing around with drinks, Kevin came up next to me and said quietly, "Hey, did you know Melissa and Troy are renovating their kitchen?" I said I didn't. He said the contractors started 2 months ago. He'd seen photos on Melissa's Instagram. He said the quote they got was somewhere north of $80,000, which he knew because Melissa had mentioned it to him in passing 6 months ago, when she was still speaking to him regularly. He said he didn't know where that money came from, and maybe it wasn't his business, but he mentioned it because Troy's business had been slow, and Kevin had offered to help chip in for Jack's birthday gift, and Melissa had waved him off, said they were fine, said they had it covered. I didn't think much of it at the time. People finance renovations. People have savings I don't know about. I filed it away and went back to watching my grandson bounce himself dizzy. 3 weeks later, sitting on the kitchen floor with the Fidelity man's voice still in my head, I thought about that kitchen renovation. $80,000. Custom cabinetry and a wolf range. From the photos on Melissa's Instagram, which I found myself scrolling through that night, looking at things I had never looked at before. It was beautiful. The kind of kitchen Lorraine always said she wanted. I want you to understand something about grief because it matters here. When you lose someone and you're still learning to do life without them, you become, I want to say vulnerable, but that's not quite right. You become available. Available to the people who offer to help, to the people who show up with solutions, to the people who know you're overwhelmed and offer to take things off your plate. It feels like love. It looks like love, and sometimes it is, but sometimes it isn't. And you don't know the difference until much later. I had trusted Melissa because she was efficient and organized and capable. Because those qualities, in a daughter who has shown up with her laptop on a Saturday to help her recently widowed father get his finances in order, look like generosity. I had not looked closer because I was grieving and exhausted, and I did not want to look closer. I wanted to believe that my child was taking care of me. I should have looked closer. Susan Brightwell moved quickly. Within 10 days, we had documentation of all 11 transfers, the linked account records, and a statement from Fidelity confirming that the external account had been added without any independent verification or second authorization. Something Susan told me should have triggered an automatic flag. Whether it would help us recover from Fidelity directly was a separate legal question, but it established the timeline clearly. She also told me something that I needed to hear. What Melissa had done was not a gray area. This was not a misunderstanding about shared expenses or a family loan gone complicated. This was financial elder abuse under state law. It was theft. The fact that she was my daughter made it more painful, not less criminal. We filed a report with the State Attorney General's office. Susan contacted Melissa's bank with a legal hold request. And then on a Tuesday morning in early October, Susan called me and said, "It's time to talk to your daughter." I want to be honest about what I felt leading up to that conversation. Not rage, not then. Something more like a cold, quiet devastation. The kind you feel when the thing you're grieving is a version of someone you loved. Someone who maybe never entirely existed the way you thought they did. I had lost Lorraine, and now I was sitting with the understanding that the daughter who had stepped up after that loss had been, at least in part, using that loss as cover. The conversation happened at my house. Melissa arrived not knowing what it was about. I had just told her I needed to talk. She came alone. She sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Kevin and I had sat 3 weeks before, and I laid the documents in front of her. She went still. Then she said, very quietly, "Dad, I can explain." I told her I had an attorney. I told her the state had been notified. I told her I wasn't there to have an argument. I was there to give her the opportunity to speak before things moved forward officially, which was the approach Susan had recommended. Not out of mercy, but because a voluntary conversation sometimes produces information that matters later. What followed was one of the harder hours of my life. She cried. She talked about the business, Troist's commissions, the debt they had taken on during COVID, the kitchen renovation that was supposed to be a way of investing in the house when they thought things were turning around. She said she had meant to pay it back. She said it again. She said she had a plan. I asked her, "Did you ever intend to tell me?" She didn't answer that one. I asked her, "Did you think I would never notice?" She said she thought I would understand if it ever came to that. That family takes care of family, that I had more than enough. That's the part that stays with me. I had more than enough, as if the amount made the taking acceptable, as if my retirement savings were a surplus to be redistributed by someone who had decided they needed it more than I did, without asking, without telling, without ever once sitting across from me and saying, "Dad, I'm in trouble. Can you help?" She never asked. She just took. I told her I loved her. I told her that would not change. And then I told her that what she had done had consequences, and that I was not going to make those consequences disappear, because it would not be right for either of us if I did. She left. She sat in her car in my driveway for a long time. I watched from the window. The legal process took 7 months. Melissa, through her own attorney, negotiated a repayment agreement. Full restitution, structured over 4 years, secured against their home equity. She did not face criminal charges, a decision that her attorney worked hard for and that I ultimately did not oppose, not because what she did was acceptable, but because I did not want my grandson to grow up visiting his mother in prison. That was the one place where I let grief and love make a practical decision. Fidelity settled separately after Susan made a compelling case that the account linking process had failed to meet basic security standards. That settlement is not something I'm able to discuss in detail, but I will say that it was meaningful. Kevin found out the full scope of things when it was mostly resolved. He listened to the whole story and didn't say much. Then he said, "Are you going to be okay financially?" I told him yes. Not where I expected to be at 62, but okay. He said, "Good. That's what matters." Then he said he had to tell me something, and I could hear him choosing his words carefully. He said he had noticed some things over the years. The way Melissa talked about my money. The way she sometimes mentioned the account balance in conversations that didn't require it. The way she had positioned herself as the one managing things without anyone really asking her to. He said he'd told himself it was nothing, that he was being uncharitable to his sister, that families sometimes work like that. He said he wished he had said something sooner. I told him I wouldn't have listened. Not then. Not in those first months after losing his mother. I wanted someone to step up and take care of things, and Melissa had stepped up, and I had been grateful, and that had been enough for me. I wasn't ready to look at anything too closely. He said he understood, and I believe he did. There's something I've been thinking about since all of this came out, something that doesn't fit neatly into the story as I've told it. When Lorraine was in the hospital, during the final week, Kevin slept in a chair by her bed for 4 nights in a row. Melissa visited twice. Troy came once. I know that people grieve differently, that distance is not always abandonment, that life makes demands on us that aren't always visible from the outside. I know all of that. But I also think about Kevin in that chair. His long legs folded up, his neck at an angle that had to have hurt, reading his mother the news on his phone. Because she liked to know what was happening in the world, even when the world had gotten very small. I didn't ask him to do that. I didn't ask him to drive 4 hours every weekend for 4 months. I didn't ask him to stay for 2 weeks and do the closet and the phone calls and the paperwork. He just did it because it was what needed doing. I called him last month. Not our usual Thursday call, a different day, on purpose. I told him I had been thinking about what I wanted to do with my estate, now that I had one again and it was mine again. I told him I had been to see a new attorney, an estate planning attorney this time, and that I had made some decisions. I wasn't going to go into detail over the phone, I said, but I wanted him to know that I saw him, that I had always seen him, even when I hadn't said so, that his mother saw him too. He was quiet for long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, "Dad, you don't have to." I told him I knew I didn't have to. I wanted to. He laughed a little, that quiet laugh he's had since he was a kid. Then he said, "Okay." That was enough. My binder is back on the shelf in the office. New account numbers, new passwords, new beneficiary designations. I log in every month now. I check the balances, the transaction history, the linked accounts. It takes about 15 minutes. I don't know why I never did it before. Actually, I do know. I didn't do it because I believed that the people in my life were doing right by me, and belief is more comfortable than verification. I know better now. That knowledge cost me more than I can fully calculate. Not just in dollars, though the dollars are significant, but in something harder to name. The particular grief of having to revise your understanding of someone you love, of having to hold 2 things at once. I love this person, and this person did this to me. I still talk to Melissa. It's different now, careful, measured. The way you walk in a room where someone once told you the floor wasn't safe. She makes her monthly payment. She asks about Jack's school. I ask about her. The love hasn't gone anywhere. But something has changed that doesn't have a word for it yet. Or maybe there is a word and I just haven't learned it. Kevin called last Thursday, same as always. We talked about his work. A new program he's helping launch for youth aging out of foster care. We talked about the Blazers, who have given us both reasons to keep our expectations low. We talked for 45 minutes about nothing important and everything that matters. Before he hung up, he said, "Hey, Dad." I said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm glad you told me. When everything happened, I'm glad you called." I told him I was too. The child who does the quiet work doesn't always need the applause, but sometimes they need you to see them, really see them, not just pass them toward whatever's easier to look at. That's the lesson I paid for, with $212,000 and 3 years of not paying close enough attention. It's a lesson I plan to remember.